Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, August 6, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, co-author of The Genius of Israel and Startup Nation, Commentary Inc. board member, commentary contributor, and host of the Call Me Back podcast, Dan Senor. Hi, Dan. Welcome back.
Good morning. I have time this morning because I wasn't chosen to be Kamala Harris's VP pick. So I've got time in my hands. And I'm not saying it's because I'm Jewish that I wasn't chosen.
It's worse.
Maybe because I'm Jewish that I'm welcome back on the Commentary podcast.
It's worse than that because you, unlike me, you don't have Minnesota roots. I have Minnesota. My mother is a Minnesotan. And if they were going to pick someone from Minnesota who wasn't a Cohen brother, I'm right here. I'm right here, and they didn't pick me. And you know why? Okay, Tim Walz is the vice presidential pick of Kamala Harris. I would say that 3 weeks ago, 90% of Democrats in the United States asked who is the governor of Minnesota, could not have answered the question, who is the governor of Minnesota. I would say that 90% of the Americans outside of Minnesota asked who the governor of Minnesota was, would not have been able to name Tim Walz as the governor of Minnesota.
I was pretty sure it was still Jesse Ventura.
See, right there. There we have. There are other Minnesota politicians you could have thought of. You could have thought of Amy Klobuchar, who actually won a couple of states in 2020 or came very close or something. I can't even remember how she did better. She and Buttigieg actually.
Yeah, she was definitely she didn't win anything, but she stayed in. She was in it longer than anyone.
She was in it, and she won a couple hundred delegates or something. Yeah. Or anyway, so what we have here, of course, is the big question. The big question is, why did she pick Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania? The obvious choice, only in the sense that Pennsylvania, every time you draw the map, every time you look at the map, every time you try to do a click on the map, you see that the Democrats have to win Pennsylvania. He's a popular governor there. He won the state in 2022 by 9 points. He outdistanced
more than that. I think he won by more than 9 points. I think he won by
okay. Anyway, whatever.
60,
he won by a
he won in the low, but won by double digits, and he's got an approval rating in the 60s. And he has governed for the short time he has been governor as a centrist.
Right. And I mean, there are people who say that I trust. I mean, I've only seen bits and pieces of him, that he is a generational talent politically, that he is a remarkably good speaker, that he has this very, very likable affect, that he comes across as a commanding adult without being obnoxious and all of that, and that he is like a star. So this raises two questions. One is, does Josh Shapiro's position as a Jewish day school graduate, somebody who did a high school program with the Israel Defense Forces, somebody who briefly worked in his very early 20s at the Israeli embassy in Washington, and who was very forthright in 2023 about the misbehavior of evildoers on the campuses in Pennsylvania, was Josh Shapiro, and is a Sabbath-keeping Jew with a kosher kitchen. Did Josh Shapiro's Jewishness play a role in his rejection? Which is a question that I'm almost terrified even to start delving into, because I don't know where it goes from there. Or, and I'm now going to just surface this, or was there something about Josh Shapiro she didn't like, that Kamala Harris didn't like, because he's too good, he's too impressive, he's too smart, and that she wants somebody who she doesn't feel will outshine her? And she is an intellectually compromised person, in my opinion, having watched her now for 5 years. She hasn't said much or done much in the last 2 or 3 weeks, so everybody loves her who wants to love her. But when she has to open her mouth and start in with the blatherskite and the nonsense and the way she goes on and all of that, we are going to be reminded of her natural quality of not very impressiveness. And maybe she just wanted a number two who was going to be deferential to her and would be in a more subservient position, perhaps, than Josh Shapiro. These are my two options. I like option 2 because I really don't want to contemplate object 1. There are so many reasons why we shouldn't, but honesty will require us to do so.
Well, can it be both? I'm sure it's both. I mean, to be honest, and perhaps other considerations as well. But in terms of option 2, it's smart. It is smart for her. It's in some sense it's the sort of anti Vance pick. Having watched Trump go through this process where his V pick is, just for all sorts of reasons, draws too much attention to himself, is an issue in and of himself, has very well-formed, even ideas I don't agree with, but well-formed ideas that he can articulate and speak to. I'm sure she doesn't want to be outshined, but as much, John, as you don't want to countenance option number 1, I'm certain that option number 1 feeds into the decision. This, to me, speaks to a sort of a campaign that worked, a campaign against him that actually worked.
Okay, so the campaign worked. The campaign, which was waged online over the last week to raise questions about him, saying things like, "Oh, look, he published an op-ed during college." An op-ed, by the way,
that was prophetic.
That was absolutely prophetic. That said, the nature of the Palestinian polity is that it will not be able to make peace with Israel. Published in 1993, it is now 2024.
Well, yeah, published around the Oslo Accords,
right?
Basically saying the Oslo Accords, and if you look at the piece, there was another piece written in the student newspaper. There was another piece written in the student newspaper that made the case for why it would work, and he wrote the counter that basically saying the Palestinians, right, societally, culturally, were not ready for coexistence with Israel.
Right.
So he was actually taking exception with the cheerleading for Oslo, and he, like I said, he was right.
Now, and not only was he right, here's what's interesting, just to put a button on this. I've said that people who have followed this closely for 3 decades have said that the minute that Yasser Arafat or Mahmoud Abbas or whoever, or Yahya Sinwar, it doesn't matter, said, giving up arms, we're giving up the armed struggle, we want a peace deal with Israel, like Anwar Sadat, which took about 2 years from the moment that he said, I want to come to Jerusalem. And Israel gave up the Sinai and had a peace deal with Egypt in 2 years, less than 2 years. That at any moment over the last 30 years that a Palestinian leader had said, we're done, let's make a deal would have been made. And this is the insight that in the Shapiro piece. And so I have said that if you surfaced an op-ed that I wrote, and I wasn't 20, I was 32 or something like that, from 1993, that was as pitch perfect accurate as that one, I would be very proud to claim it for myself, because I said a lot of dumb things in op-eds then that I really wouldn't want to have resurfaced. So I congratulate him on that. But of course, it was a problem for him, and he went out and apologized for it. He said, look, I was only 20 years old. A funny feed called the Daily Fress put out something in response to it that Josh Shapiro apologized for having a bar mitzvah. I was only 13. He said, it did make him look like, okay, I'm willing to say anything to get this job.
I'm willing to unjew myself. In order to get the job. Look, right. I have a couple reactions. The first off, I've got to say, I am sad by this as a result of this whole thing, because the 4 of us all know a lot of Josh Shapiro's. Right? When you think about it, we all know.
Literally. We each probably know 2 different guys named Josh Shapiro.
Yeah, but just the profile of Josh Shapiro. This is like when I was just thinking the other day, when I was working on Capitol Hill in the 90s, I'd go to Kesher, Israel in Georgetown, the synagogue, and you'd go to synagogue, and there were staffers who worked on the Hill who worked for Republicans like me. There were staffers who worked on the Hill who worked for Democrats, who were Jewish, who would go to synagogue, and everyone was kind of had the same background, grew up with relatively observant homes, felt an unapologetic connection to Israel, saw no bones. Certainly my Jewish Democratic friends who were Jewishly observant felt no They didn't have to kind of strike a balance between working for a Democratic member of Congress or having ambitions to be a professional in Democratic politics and being outwardly, unapologetically, proudly Jewish and pro-Israel. Like there was just no sense of compromise that the one had to contemplate. That was what I came of age with, and I don't think that's the case anymore. I really don't. And we've all known this for the last couple of years, right? When we've seen what's going on in the Democratic Party. But I think what happened to Josh Shapiro put the exclamation point on that reality, because like I said, we all know Josh Shapiro's, as you say, John, we all know a bunch of people named Josh Shapiro. But if you just look at the trajectory of Josh Shapiro, the way he grew up, the way he's raising his own 4 children, the way he lives his life in Montgomery County, in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Like, we know that world, we know those people, and there's a message to those people that you got to think twice about being a proud Jew and a Democrat if you want to be appointed. In running for office may be easier, but maybe not as there are competitive primaries in some of these places. But if you want to get appointed, it's not going to be so easy.
That's the thing that really gets me about this, is because Josh Shapiro is the perfect Josh Shapiro. If you're willing to consider a Josh Shapiro, this is the Josh Shapiro.
This is the apotheosis of Josh Shapiro. This is the
apotheosis of Josh Shapiro. This is the most Josh Shapiro-ish person, because he has all the other things that you need for the campaign too, and all the attempts at knocking him down were weak and silly. Like they were flimsy. There was nothing to anything. Even that, op-ed from when he was 20 years old, it was like, I think the Palestinians want to make war on Israel more than they want peace. And it's like, that's something he should apologize for saying. But he is 51, right? I mean, that's the perfect age, right? He's the governor of Pennsylvania. He's popular. He's got crossover. I read a piece on Fox the other day where the reporter talked to MAGA aligned people who self-identified as MAGA type voters in Pennsylvania, what they think of Josh Shapiro. And one MAGA woman said, boy, if he accepts that VP slot with Kamala Harris, I will lose so much respect for him. And it was like, have you ever heard? Yeah. When was the last time you heard like a MAGA means you're in a movement already that's on the right, and MAGA people saying like, well, I like him, but if he's willing to run with, that's how likable Josh Shapiro is. That people were saying he's going to blow, his crossover. I know plenty
of Republican donors in Pennsylvania who are Jewish, Republican donors who are Jewish who supported his campaign. I mean, now, but they're so partisans.
If you're not that...
Seth, you said that the reasons were flimsy, but I think Dan would say, not that I want to put words in Dan's mouth, but to sort of bring this conversation around, they weren't flimsy at all, given the current nature of the Democratic Party. That Kamala Harris was being asked to make a choice, and the choice was she going to declare that the center of the Democratic Party could be occupied by her on the one hand as the nominee, and by the governor of this swing state who had supported the ouster of the president of the University of Pennsylvania, who attacked the protesters on campus, who complained publicly about anti-Semitism. Was that a place that she wanted to be in? Because that was the complaint against him online, was he attacked the protesters, and that was bad. We're sitting here and assume that the people who are listening to us, a vast majority of you probably agree that we thought they were bad. They were bad. They were behaving badly. It was disgusting what they did, anti-Semitic what they did, and the disruptions and the implicit support for Hamas and all of that. And yet a campaign was waged by progressives and young Democrats and all of that to say that he was beyond the bounds because he held these views. So that's not flimsy at all. That is a new Overton window that they are moving to their place, which is, sorry, not this guy. even Waltz, who like
Meaning sorry, not this guy. Meaning sorry, not the
Jew. Not only is he a Jew, but he's a Jew who didn't say like Mark Pocan or something like that. I'm on the side of the protesters, or we really need free speech or something
and
like that.
I think there's an interesting point to that, which is that it also shows, sometimes we reference the British screenwriter David Baddiel's Jews don't count line. And he's usually talking about it in terms of entertainment, but his point underlying Jews don't count is that in places where we make space for put upon minorities or whatever to to have either greater participation or to listen to them, when they're saying something bothers them or whatever it is, that sort of left-wing political sensitivity, it doesn't apply to Jews. And I think that the protest thing is a really interesting case of it being politically so here, because remember that the protesters mobbed outside a Jewish-owned restaurant because the owner was Jewish
in Philadelphia. Called Goldie's, right?
And he's the governor of this. He's the recognizably Jewish governor of the state where that happened. And you can imagine he's probably not that many generations removed from when people mobbing a Jewish storefront is, fairly familiar thing to his family. And so if you had even the slightest bit of like sensitivity, the slightest bit in your body, you would say, well, an observant Jew named Josh Shapiro not liking that people are mobbing Goldies, maybe we should give him a break. Like, even if you think he was too mean to the protesters, but there's like
opposite. Seth, that's my point. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
If he is to pay proper fealty to the progressives who now want to be the vanguard of the Democratic Party, he would remain silent. That's what they're looking for. The price of the ticket to being part of their movement is to betray his own people in some fundamental sense. And that's where my fear here goes. Let me make a weird analogy. George H.W. Bush, running for president in 1988, having been a pro-choice candidate who joined a pro-life ticket, right, in 1980. He was the pro-choice Republican. Ronald Reagan, pro-life Republican, joins Reagan's ticket, therefore becomes a supporter of his administration's policies on abortion. But a big question arose. Was he going to be pro-life himself when 1988 rolled around and he wasn't the certain nominee, but he was, certainly the front runner. And he made it very, very clear that the price of the ticket for him to get the nomination was that he was going to switch horses and be pro-life. And not only was he pro-life, he was really pro-life. He not only chose a pro-life running mate, he did a lot of stuff. He was more pro-life in some ways than Ronald Reagan was in policy terms. And this is the question that haunts me. Did we just see a thing where, in order to consolidate the base of the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris made the calculation that what she needed was somebody who wasn't going to be known as having these views on Israel that he had. Not that Walz's views on Israel, as far as we know them, are bad. He spoke before AIPAC and said Israel's our closest ally, though that was 14 years ago. It's not like it was, yesterday. But that the price of the ticket now, if she wants to consolidate her party support, that her calculation or her people's calculation is to consolidate her party support, this was a fight she could not have. That is very, very, very alarming, because it not only says, okay, maybe not smart to have this guy as your running mate for complicated reasons, but you do it sotto voce. You somehow make it clear to him at the jump you don't want him, right? So he'll say, I'm taking myself out, because it was risky. It was always risky. Let's talk honestly. Like, America's a very philo-Semitic country, but it's a risk.
Yeah, but John, 24 years ago,
Yeah.
when Joe Lieberman was chosen by Al Gore, him being he was Josh Shapiro. I mean, he really was.
Yeah, further to the right as a Jew. Yeah,
right,
more,
right.
Yeah, an Orthodox,
even
Jew.
more, right,
yeah.
a more Orthodox version of Josh Shapiro, but still wore it on his sleeve,
right,
and talked about it proudly and publicly.
Yeah.
Obviously, his connections to Israel were deep, and you know, he didn't mince words, and that he was Jewish. I remember, again, back to all my Jewish friends who worked in professional Democratic politics or in the policy world, him being a Jew, the sense was it was a feature, not a bug.
Right. And now it's 24 years later, and it's clearly a bug. And it's a bug. And that's the scary part, is that it's a bug.
I just want to...
Yeah, okay. Unless we hear that they say she didn't click, or they didn't click, or
I don't
Shapiro...
buy it. I don't buy it.
Well, what
all
else
signs last week were, I mean, look, I just on Tim Walz, just to, you know, our friend Yair Rosenberg has been doing some incredible writing on this, on the pressure campaign against Shapiro over the last week. He's been writing The Atlantic, and just I'm pulling up a tweet where he just chronicled, okay, this politician voted in Congress to condemn a UN resolution against Israeli settlements. So he voted to condemn the UN resolution.
We're talking about
Israeli
Shapiro.
No. Here we go. Waltz, a member of Congress. He's describing a profile of a politician. Yeah. He's saying, look at this politician, right? This politician voted to condemn a UN resolution critical of Israeli settlements that Obama allowed to pass. This politician participated in an AIPAC conference and called Israel, quote, our truest and closest ally in the region with a commitment to values of personal freedoms and liberties surrounded by a pretty tough neighborhood, close quote. This politician met with Netanyahu personally, released a photo to the media and to social media. And he said of the campus protests in 2023, quote, I think when Jewish students are telling us they feel unsafe in that, we need to believe them. And I do believe them. Creating a space where political dissent or political rallying can happen is one thing. Intimidation is another, close quote. He said in June of this year, quote, the ability of Jewish people to self-determine themselves is foundational. The failure to recognize the state of Israel is taking away that self-determination. So it is anti-Semitic. So then he's saying, basically being critical of Israel in an extreme way is anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. So this is not Josh Shapiro. Everything I just read to you is Tim Walz.
Right.
So holding these positions is not a deal killer in the Democratic Party, clearly. Holding these positions and being a Jew is. And that's our new world. That's what today to me is about.
By the way, the obverse is that you can be a Jew and hold the anti-Israel positions. You're pretty safe.
You're even
then.
better. That is the new feature. If Lieberman was a feature, not a bug, what you just described, Abe, is now the new feature.
Well, that's one thing I think they were uncomfortable with regarding Shapiro, is because the Jews that they have, it's like, remember what did Trump say? Look at my blacks over here or something one time at a rally. It's like Democrats saying, look at my Jews. Here are my Jews over here. Their Jews are Bernie Sanders and all this. There's a really big problem of tokenism in the Democratic Party. I mean, the Squad really practices it by saying, well, I can't be anti-Semitic. I'm partying with Jewish Voice for Peace tonight or something like that. But there's been a steady stream of my Jewish friend over here says I'm right type of speak from the Democratic Party. And there hasn't been an observant Jew. There hasn't been a Joe Lieberman or a Josh Shapiro who's also, sort of recognized as, well, he's Jewish and he says it, so we need to take his opinion really seriously. The only Jews whose opinion we need to take really seriously are the ones, who are like Bernie Sanders, who are willing to renounce it. And so that's the other problem, is that it can, I think that Democrats didn't want to have like the two Jews, not that there were also three shuls, but the two Jews, like, I don't think they wanted to have, but you could be this type of Jew or you could be this type of Jew. It's all the same. They feel like they need, at least the progressives feel like they need the word Jew on all their political stuff, and it always be taking over the Capitol to oppose a BDS resolution or something in Congress.
I think that's a very, very salient idea that institutionally, the Democratic left wants the word Jewish to be used to kosher them against charges of anti-Semitism. Jewish Voice for Peace, J Street, the Jewish left that is protesting in the streets in Israel, the judicial reform stuff that obviously matters a lot less than it did before October 7th. All of that was providing them cover for their hostility to Israel by saying, look, even all the Jews over here are having this. And Shapiro complicated that and then raised questions about the possibility of this kind of fight or another kind of fight, which is a fight at the convention, right? That maybe this would encourage forces of chaos that might be stilled. They have reason to hope might be stilled by the fact that Biden's out and Harris is in, and don't want Trump to win or whatever. And maybe Chicago won't be the crap show that we thought maybe it would turn into as the college year begins to rally and these people decide to go to Chicago.
Well, I would say that if you look at Harris's polling, which obviously she's polling better than Biden, but it's still a coin toss. And then actually in many polls, depending on which ones, Trump is still slightly ahead. But nonetheless, she's definitely experiencing some kind of mini bounce. And if you dig deep in where that mini bounce is coming from, it's basically consolidating unenthused Democrats who had previously been unenthused by Biden, who are now excited that Biden has been replaced. That's what it is. It's Democrats coming home. And who are most of those Democrats who are coming home? The exact people, John, that you were saying that could have been troublemakers of the convention have been troublemakers. I mean, they represent that demographic. And so they're coming home. And the Harris campaign could have made the calculation. Why do we want to screw that up? We've just consolidated and addressed a problem that Biden couldn't address. We've addressed it. Let's bank that, and now let's move on to appealing to other parts of the electorate in the country. And we don't need Shapiro for that. We need Tim Walz.
Right. But that's the joke, of course, is that that's a bank shot 4D chess political calculation, maybe, and the Shapiro calculation is like linear and obvious. No path to victory for Kamala Harris avoids Pennsylvania in the Democratic column. You cannot draw a map without Pennsylvania. He's the popular governor of Pennsylvania. He's got a political organization in Pennsylvania. Yes, it's true. You can't depend on a state being delivered by a candidate by a vice presidential candidate, obviously, but it couldn't hurt. And that was why I think everybody on earth thought that he was the obvious choice until the left started to open a mouth. And what the left opened a mouth about, implicitly too explicitly, which I guess gets to Abe's point, was his Jewishness. It was all implicit. Don't like his op-eds about Israel. Don't like what he's saying about the campus protests, which are really about Israel. Or he served in the IDF, which he did not. He was on a high school program.
Again, we know IDF. A million kids who've done programs. Like, that's my point. Yeah. He fits this profile of worked on a kibbutz or did a semester or a gap year, volunteered for some program that was helpful to the.
Look, it's chilling. I'll give you a break, but he is very much. I mean, just to go to this podcast, Seth's an Orthodox Jew who is homeschooling his children. Josh Shapiro is Dan and me. Josh Shapiro keeps a kosher home, observes the Sabbath to some degree, and sends his kids and is himself a graduate of Jewish day school. I'm not, but my wife was, and he was, and we're on the right, and he's a liberal, but this is all very common And we're looking at being told that people like us are too outre or bad to be in positions of power by one of the two major parties in the United States. Now, a generation ago, before Joe Lieberman, we would have said, well, of course a Jew isn't going to be vice president. Like, the country's not ready for that yet. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Who knows? I don't know. Safer Jews would have said, it's safer not to stick your head up like that because you don't want to see whether the gunshots are going to come your way. Like, keep your head down. Don't get out over your skis. Don't get too ambitious about things. All of that. The last 40 years, and I would say the last year, I think the last year in the Jewish community has changed people in the sense that they're coming after us. We've got to harness our own power that we've had that we've been harnessing for 100 years to protect ourselves, our people, students, our kids who are college campuses, professors, Jews on streets, stuff like that. This is all really happening, and we can't just stay silent. But it has generally been the mood of Jews in America that we're incredibly grateful for what America has been for us and done for us, and all we want is to be left alone. Josh Shapiro rises as the obvious candidate for the vice presidential slot in this very unusual set of circumstances. And I think we're being told by this one party, and not by the old American consensus, which is like, we're a Christian country. We're Christians, and you're Jews, and that's weird. And
right, that's the thing. Kamala also wouldn't be admitted to the same golf club. That's the same country club. That's the thing that sort of rankles about it.
Yeah, no. So it's not the old criticism, which is like, you're weird because you're not Protestant, or you're not Catholic, or you're not what you believe this old faith that we don't believe in, and you have weird practices and all of that, and you're sort of on one side, and you don't want to marry other people who aren't of your faith. Just you're not one of us, right? This is not good. So Jews never really taunted that, didn't really want to go right at that and say, no, give me whatever it is that you have. And we've gotten more assertive about that, and all that's all fine. And here, the party that is supposed to be the liberal and philo-Semitic party in the United States, that for 9 decades Jews have voted for in percentages averaging, around 70% historically for the party, is now, it appears, ditching a candidate solely for being Jewish. Now, Abe, I wanted to...
but Jews are responding. I mean, or seemingly. I mean, you should talk about the Siena poll of New York Jews.
Right. So we now have 2 straight Siena polls over 2 months. The first one, which I wrote about at the end of June, said that Biden was ahead of Trump among New York Jews. This is not a poll of New York Jews; it's a poll of New Yorkers. With in this first poll, there were only like 100 Jews in the sub tab. 52-46 Biden. A 46% result for Trump would be almost oceanic in terms of the Jewish vote. And this poll that came out this morning has it 50-49 for Trump over Harris. That would be an earthquake, a huge political earthquake. And by the way, a political earthquake that could potentially have ramifications in Pennsylvania. Why? Because Pennsylvania is the state with the 3rd largest Jewish population, or the 4th in the country. It's got about 400,000 Jews, 270,000 voting Jews. Jews voted around 80%. You can sort of do all the math. If for some reason Jews split 50-50, the Democratic ticket would lose 30 to 40,000 votes right there. And that Biden scored in 2020, and that in an incredibly close state, that Biden only won by 80,000 in 2020 could make a very big difference. So these numbers are real. But Abe, I wanted to ask you about a point that you made, which is that our friend Noah Pollack basically said he's glad it's not Shapiro, that Shapiro would have been used to kosher Kamala Harris's moves against Israel, were he not only to run for office with her, but also to be her vice president. That he would be deployed as the house Jew saying, as an observant Jew, very served in the IDF, whoever, I am for this, whatever it is that you say you want to do. What do you, Abe, you want to sort of articulate that?
That's how I've felt about it the whole time, to be honest. Especially when Shapiro began his walk back of his college op-ed, he would be a beard for anti-Israel policy. What's interesting is that I've spoken to Jews personally of widely varying opinions about Shapiro and about the idea of a Shapiro pick. Great many liberal Jews or not liberal Jews thought he'd be good because he's good. And then I have spoken to Jews who were more of the mind that you sort of alluded to when you were talking about anti-Semitism of the past year, where they thought it would be too much of an incitement to anti-Jewish activities. So they were scared of a Shapiro pick. And then there's where I land and Noah Pollack, which is that it does us no good, us meaning Zionists, to have a ticket that is designed to use Jewish identity as a cover for harming Israel. And I do think that that's what this is about. Look, I don't think Kamala, we say that we don't know where she stands on this, we don't know where she stands on that, and that's true enough. She was pretty clear, and the only substantive statement that she has made since, I don't know, it's already 2 weeks, since being deemed Biden's successor here, that she was a sort of mouthpiece, not a sort of, she was a mouthpiece for anti-Israel propaganda.
She would not stay silent about.
She would not stay silent. She would not say. So, as far as I'm concerned, she can go do that without the help of any Jew.
And we've been hearing for the last few years, even before she made that statement, that in internal deliberations in the administration, she has not been typically a part of many of them. There are basically three people advising Biden on the Israel crisis post-October 7th, Blinken, Sullivan, and Brett McGurk. They're the three, and it's not clear that Harris has ever really been included in any of that, but to the extent that she has weighed in, from folks I've talked to and some public reporting, she's always been a very critical force, a critical voice against Israel. Always, as you said, Abe, a vessel for like the worst, most extreme anti-Israel characterization of events when they are looking at events. So I just think what she said a couple weeks ago after meeting with Netanyahu was just the logical extension of that.
Right. I think politically, Harris comes from a class of people, a class of politicians who arose after what that great book called The Great Sort. She became a politician when states, and her state in particular, stopped being places with divided populaces, with a whole range of ideological positions from right to left, where a statewide politician in her first big off, and she won 3 statewide races, right? AG and then, or 2, AG and then Senate.
Senate.
Where you'd have to kind of like go around the state and make yourself known to a lot of people who might not nominally be in your base camp in order to get over 51%.
But to be clear, John, the whole race for Kamala Harris, for every race she's ever run in, is an intra-Democratic Party race.
It's
exactly a very
right.
Deep blue state.
Yes.
So you never actually have to deal with swing voters, independent voters, and God forbid, let alone Republican voters.
Right.
You just have to work the system internally. It's a pecking order. You need to climb up the.
Right.
You need to climb up the.
This is exactly my point, that she is going to be 60 years old, and in her entire political career, she never, and this was true of Obama, by the way, as well. They never got it in their fingertips or in their kishkas how to reach out beyond their own narrow world.
They worked in a system, and they have to. It's like a system, and you have to climb the system.
So she is now trying to become president of the United States. She's also trying to become. She's now obviously is the head of the Democratic Party. but that the idea that would have been sort of completely standard issue to almost anybody, that it was really good if you were the sort of person who could appeal to people outside of your base. That's good. That's a good thing. Like, that's exciting, because then, nominally your base is enough to win, but it's never enough to win. Trump.
Well, that was the appeal of an Andy Bashir, the governor of
Right.
Kentucky.
Yeah, because he's in a
state that votes overwhelmingly Republican.
but
Trump
went with him.
Right. Or the governor of North Carolina.
Yeah.
And that's what ended up being sort of damning in that sense, is because when it started, you could say, I could see picking Bashir over Shapiro. I can see what that brings. And when the governor of North Carolina was in the running, you could say, well, Democrats are going after North Carolina. I can Roy Cooper. I could see that. Right. That's the thing that makes us feel bad about.
But even Shapiro, this is where it gets, because Dan, you just said she was within the Democratic coalition in these jungle primaries where, the top two finishers were almost always Democrats. And so there was no race between one party and the other. The Republican Party largely eliminated from contention in these Novembers, since they went with this weird jungle primary system. Josh Shapiro's a Democrat. So but she never even had to deal with a Democrat like him, who has an appeal to moderates, and she needs to appeal to moderates in these very states, the one of which Shapiro is the governor of. By the way, Minnesota is not such a state, because though Trump, during Biden's decline and fall, Trump was suddenly competitive in Minnesota. Minnesota is not really a purple state. It really is. I mean, it was, and then it pretty much moved blue. Wisconsin is, and Michigan is, and Pennsylvania is, and he was too controversial to pick for her inside the Democratic coalition. That's how bubbled she is. That's how she is in a liberal bubble. She may not believe anything. She may not really be an ideologue. She may not be this, but her sense of the political world outside that weird electoral coalition in California may be very desiccated or non-existent. And she has 3 months to do something to appeal to people who might still be interested in voting for Trump. And I don't think this pick suggests that she has a strategy for that. Now, it's early going, and maybe she does. If she thinks that because Tim Walz speaks in a Minnesota accent, Trump voters are going to like him, that's crazy. Our friend Mike Murphy said something I thought was funny this morning. Mike's very smart, but he is a Republican, not a Democrat, and he knows. And he said, this will be good because Walz can really appeal to people like him in Wisconsin and Michigan. And I'm like, I'm sorry, actually, the view of Wisconsin and Minnesota is a little like the view of New Jerseyans about New York. People from Wisconsin aren't that crazy about people from Minnesota, and vice versa. This idea that these things are convertible because they somehow inhabit the same. We know that Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are politically similar, because for 3 election cycles, they have been politically similar. Not because, Wisconsin has cheese and Minnesota has lakes, and people on lakes eat cheese.
But Minnesota starts with the same letter that Michigan does and Missouri does. So you can't overlook that.
Yeah, I mean, they are very distinct, particularly Minnesota has but Minnesota and Wisconsin both have extremely distinct, weird, and individual political cultures. Not to say Michigan doesn't, but Michigan's more mainstream. But, Minnesota basically was run not by the Democratic Party for 100 years, was run by a weird made-up party called Democratic Farmer Labor. The Progressive Party played a big role in Wisconsin in the, until the 1960s. These are weird states. And so it's an odd idea that picking Waltz is good because he looks like a 60-year-old white guy. He looks like Carl from Up. He looks like Ed Asner or something. Like that's going to win him votes from Trump voters in Eagle River, Wisconsin, where my kid goes to camp. Believe me, I've been there. I've been there a lot.
He's Tim Kaine. He'll be Tim Kaine. He will be. If they're elected, obviously he'll be a household name. If he's not elected, everyone will forget about him.
Right. Well, and,
nationally, does anyone remember Tim Kaine? I mean, when you think about it, it's like he's just.
This is the opportunity cost question, because I was thinking about this in relation, since his name is Tim and Tim Kaine's name is Tim. And Hillary Clinton said, I picked Tim Kaine because I wanted to know I had somebody that I could trust. If something happened, he could step right into the presidency. He's solid, and he's this, and he's that. And okay. Kaine was a dud. He was like the biggest dud in American political history. He was like the debate. He was a dud. His speech at the convention was a dud. His introductory speech was a dud. He was a dud. That was an incredibly close race. That was an incredibly close race.
That the Democrats didn't need to worry about, at least not in 2016.
Right. That was a race won by 88,000 votes across 3 states. You think if Hillary hadn't made a better vice presidential choice, that might have made a little bit of a difference? That's 88,000 votes. Could somebody that 88,000 people may have liked more than Tim Kaine, could that have made a difference? I'm not talking nationwide now, because we don't look at that race nationwide. Just as Vance looks like he was an opportunity cost for Trump because he's polling so badly, and you prefer in a close race not to have your vice presidential pick polling badly. We'll see how Waltz does, but the Kaine example suggests this isn't like a game. Like, this isn't like, I can pick anybody I want because it's not really going to matter. It could matter. It could matter a little bit. It could matter in Pennsylvania alone. It could have mattered.
I'm not even joking when I say that that's what she thinks she did, because she picked a guy who he has pictures of himself on the internet holding baby pigs on a farm. And to Kamala Harris's brain, that is, that's those are the farmers and the Southerners and the Midwesterners and this. If a farm animal is white and a farm animal, and that to her, from the bubble that she's inside, she thinks that's the same as like Andy Bashir, who's literally a left-wing Democrat who can win, who's proven he can win in the South.
Can we move on, Dan? Because our first thought when we were talking about you coming on was we needed to talk about, what about the impending in Israel and the Middle East. Impending what? We don't know. We had a depressing conversation, you and I, over the weekend about our families and the kinds of things that they were hearing from Israeli officials, documents being received saying, here's how to stock up on water for 30 days.
Yeah, the municipality of Jerusalem put out this 20-page document that specifies with incredible detail and granularity what to do to prepare, which they didn't do, by the way, in April when the Iranian attack was coming. So, I think most folks I'm speaking to are pretty unnerved.
Yeah, and obviously there are a variety of possibilities, and I floated yesterday with John Schanzer an optimistic idea that I want to float with you, which is Israel, I believe now, with what happened over the last 36 hours, not that much noted, Israel has gone on this series of pinpoint individual strikes against terrorist leaders in Gaza, in Tehran, and in Lebanon. 5 or 6 people, obviously the biggest being Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas. We had Mohammed Daif, the military commander, the second in military command in Gaza. We had Shakar, the military commander of Hezbollah, so long in the game.
And by the way, these operations in Lebanon are not just in southern Lebanon; they're in the Darya neighborhood of Beirut, which is where Hezbollah is like headquarters, and also Damascus.
Right.
The operation in Damascus that precipitated the Iranian response.
And there was
and this
some
has been going on for a while.
Yeah, and there was some event yesterday in Iran we don't understand. There was some kind of big fire somewhere that erupted out of nowhere and all this. My optimistic thing is that the whole point of this is not just to go, yeah, we hate you, let's kill terrorists, but they're trying to interrupt operational command in the world of the Iranian axis to intrude, to unnerve, and actually to break points of contact that will make it more difficult for coordinated strikes and stuff like that. And clearly, though the Iranians flew the red flag of revenge and Khamenei has said, we're going to destroy you and all of that, that has got to be freaking the Iranians out. Like few things have freaked them out. And Israel's been freaking them out for 8 years. It stole the entire cache of papers on the nuclear program. It's killed 4 or 5 Iranian nuclear scientists. Now it goes right into Tehran, plants a bomb somewhere 2 months early to take out Ismail Haniyeh. Like,
also the operation. Don't overlook the operation in Yemen and the port there, which was extremely valuable piece of real estate that Israel took out.
Right. So I'm wondering whether this general effort, which is to, as I say, intrude, but also what's the ultimate purpose of all this is to reestablish deterrence, to say, leave us alone. Stop now. Stop doing what you're doing. We're going to win in Gaza. Hezbollah, don't go any further. Iran, stop, because you're only going to get into bigger. Maybe it's going to have an effect. Maybe the Iranians aren't going to come with all their barrels blazing because Israel has had a positive deterrent effect with these exercises. That's my optimistic.
It's very optimistic
scenario.
That's very optimistic, which is
and I'm not an optimist. It's very
off-brand. Very off-brand for this podcast. I don't want to be party to this podcast the day it doesn't engage in crushing morosity, John. So I feel like I need to disassociate from this conversation. I don't come here for hope and good cheer.
Well,
okay?
I go to you for hope. I go to you for hope. I listen to you and Haviv. Haviv is bizarrely. Haviv Redigur on Dan's podcast, often bizarrely positive sounding.
Yeah, he was very upbeat yesterday.
You're having an effect on me. It's your fault. I'm blaming you. But go ahead.
No. Well, Haviv is saying 2 things. Haviv is saying the war is coming, and Haviv is saying bring it. So he's not saying the war is not coming. You're all right. Okay. I think there will be some kind of response. I think the big debate is where on the dial of intensity the response is. I think the consensus, I hate to use that word, but the consensus in the Israeli intelligence community is that Iran does not want a regional war. And Israel doesn't want a regional war. So if neither Iran nor Israel want a regional war, but Iran has to respond in some way, and that doesn't mean a response not intended to catalyze a regional war can't lead to a regional war, as we know, but that's not what they're trying to do. So that may lead to some kind of response, but not a sort of overly aggressive response. I want to come back to your earlier point about the importance of taking out these leaders that Israel has been taking out in Hezbollah and Hamas. And I people have this tendency to think, there's this line I hear pundits making all the or quoting all the time. Rumsfeld, when we were in Iraq, used to have this line. He used to often ask the military, "Are we creating more terrorists than we're killing?" And that was one of his tests, one of his measures in dealing with the insurgency. And so a number of pundits have been quoting that Rumsfeld line now about Israel's operations in Gaza and the region. Fareed Zakaria keeps quoting. The first time I ever thought I'd ever hear Fareed Zakaria quoting Don Rumsfeld, he's saying, well, are we creating more terrorists? Is Israel creating more terrorists than it's taking off the battlefield? And if you believe that it is creating more terrorists in these operations than is taking off the battlefield, you have to believe you can easily recreate the terrorists that are being taken off the battlefield by Israel. And I think that underappreciates how sophisticated these organizations are, how sophisticated Hamas was as a military organization, how sophisticated Hezbollah is as a military organization. These are the equivalent. These are not just like these ragtag militias that kind of emerged in Iraq after the fall of the regime. These are very sophisticated equivalents of like a light infantry army of a nation state. They're organized geographically, they're organized in a traditional military structure, battalions, brigades, they have command structures. In the case of Hezbollah, by the way, they've been basically an arm of the IRGC fighting in Syria for the last number of years to prop up Assad. I mean, they have real warfare training. And because they're sophisticated, well-run military organizations, you can't take out their leaders and like just recreate them overnight. You are breaking down the command structure of these organizations, years and years in the making, years and years in training. And it's not like some of these guys, Mohammed Deif played I don't want to say indispensable, but as close to an indispensable role as you could imagine in the modernization of Hamas into like I said, a light infantry, well-organized army over the last 20 years. You take him off the battlefield. It's not like another Mohammed Deif just walks on and says, "Okay, I'm here. Where do I log in? I'm ready to go." So it has these operations and these hits have symbolic value. They also are enormously disruptive from an operational standpoint. It not only spooks them, but the various actors, but it's just not so simple to plug someone in new to take over these operations. And that's, Ronen Bergman, who wrote this book, Rise and Kill First, which is all about Israel's history of taking out these quote unquote assassinations as a strategy. He's been on my podcast recently quite a bit. And I asked him, is this enough? Is this an effective strategy, what they're doing? And he said, it can be an effective strategy if it all depends with what it's paired with. And we don't really know what it's being paired with.
Right.
But let's assume there's more to it than just taking these guys out. But taking these guys out, I believe, really jams up these organizations' ability to execute. I mean, think about Sinwar. Sinwar is now sitting in a tunnel in Gaza with fewer and fewer people to coordinate with, the people he'd been working with forever. Deif was his partner in arms, his brother in arms. And then he's wondering every day, are they getting closer to me? He's hearing about Shukra. He's hearing about Deif.
And Israel found the superhighway for resupply between
from the
Egypt
Sinai.
from Egypt into Gaza, this tunnel off the Philadelphia under the Philadelphia corridor. It's amazing to look at. If you haven't seen it, just Google it, take a look at it. I said yesterday, it's like the Bat Cave. It's a part of the final immensely sophisticated thing, as you mentioned, like the Tunnel City was an immensely sophisticated 15-year operation. Don't underestimate underestimate or think they're just they're passionate nationalists who cannot be stopped because they will just keep coming in waves because they want their country and they want their land and this is something else going on. And of course, that's really true of Iran, and Iran is really the X factor here. What it is willing to attempt and risk, and then of course what it might fear, not to go back into the optimism quotient, but what it might fear from an Israeli response to their response. Because the one thing we know that Israel did when Biden said take the win, don't go major at Iran after the strike, after the 300 missile strike, ended up being largely a failure, was that they took out a radar installation, but they did so with an advanced weapon that Iran had no idea that Israel possessed. And that was a message you have no idea what kinds of things we can do to you. We heard that some part of Iran's internet went out yesterday or the day before yesterday. Stuff is happening, all of which seem to be signals to Iran that as they say on the internet, FAFO, right? Like don't be
and
so sure. Yeah.
the Haniyeh assassination also makes them doubt the inner circle. There's fingers pointing at each other because somebody that was not at first people said, wow, where did they shoot a missile from that they got it? And it turned out no, somebody walked a bomb into
but
Ismail
it's the same
Haniyeh's room. So there's also a huge trust breakdown here in the IRGC.
That literally would be like someone getting in months in advance, getting into Blair House in Washington D.C. And plotting an operation.
Right. Yeah. When Keir Starmer is coming and is going to stay at Blair House, and the IRA puts a bomb there 6 months early. But I mean, this is true.
Addition to what
true
other
in Beirut.
Weapons and stuff they might have, it's what other people have they bought off.
Yeah, and that's an important point, not just for Iran, but for Hezbollah and for Sinwar, because they had to figure out where Sugarwood. They had to figure out where Dave was, and you find that out with human intelligence usually, and you want them to think that it's human intelligence so that they turn on each other, and none of them trust each other. And when someone comes to Sinwar and says, we can do X, Y, and Z, Sinwar doesn't go, is that right? Or are you an Israeli agent trying to get me to stick my head out so that I'll get shot? Like, we don't know. And the only X factor aside from Iran is remains the hostages and the increasingly bleak mood in Israel about the Gaza operation because the hostages are still there. And there's no question that the unnerved quality, like in one sense, you might have expected that after 9 or 10 months of this, that this would be a sort of distressingly familiar fact of life that wouldn't continue to be the most grinding emotional problem for an entire country that needs to get on with its life. But that is not the case. From my perspective, I haven't been there, but from what I hear and read and feel, it's almost as though the hostage crisis is getting worse, not better, for the Israeli body politic. That it is more distressing, that it is more soul sapping. Is that?
Yeah, I agree with that, John. I think what's happening is there was this sense in the initial months after October 7th that, and certainly with the success of the first deal, the only deal so far, late November, was that there was a path to addressing the hostage situation. The timeline I would put on it before the 1-year anniversary of October 7th. But now hostage family members I've met with as recently as last week were saying they're already starting to plan for the 1-year anniversary of October 7th. And they're already trying to get their heads around, like, what do they say when their loved ones are in the dungeons of Gaza? What do they say 1 year later? And then you just start to think about Gilad Shalit. 5 years. 5 years. Think about Ron Arad. Is this where this is heading? Are we heading to a world in which there is no quote unquote quick fix like there was late last year when the deal was done and a number of hostages got out after 50 plus days, but this is really heading into a multi-year trauma where there's no end, there's no path to an end, and the world seems to be moving on. And I feel like that I'm hearing that more and more from the hostage families is like their head. They were so focused, the hostage movement, the hostage forum. You spend time with these families every day. They're churning. I got a message yesterday from another hostage family member. I've got ideas for what we can do. I want to pick your brain about what we can do here. They're churning, which is as though it's a mindset that they're always just steps away from getting a deal. If they can just get this one to do that, if we can get Bibi to do this, if we can get Qatar to do that, if we can get Hamas to, and they're problem solving every day, which is important.
It's hard for them. It's important for them. Yeah,
but it's a big pivot to There's nothing happening in the next 24 hours or 48 hours or the next week. There's no shuttle negotiations going on. Cairo, Paris, Doha. It's things start to settle in for a long run. That is a new world.
Yeah. Okay. Last question, because it's unanswerable, I believe, although I think it's answerable later. So the Israelis, as Haviv Rediger said on your podcast and others have said, and is evident, there was a shift in strategy. There was this decision to combine the effort to sort of finish the job in Gaza with this reach out beyond the borders to take the fight to Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran beyond the borders in this way that they are doing that, and that this represents a kind of combined new strategy. And the question is, did the Israeli high command and Bibi, and there's no war cabinet per se, but there's now Bibi and Gallant or whatever, did the American crisis at the top with Biden's infirmity and leaving the race and the incredible uncertainty and all of that say, all right, we better get cracking. We have we don't know what the hell is going to happen here. We don't know what the X factor of Kamala Harris and her people versus Blinken and Sullivan and McGurk and Bill Burns on our side. We don't know what's going on. We can't continue to listen or whatever, that they had to move, and they would move unilaterally, or maybe they would move unilaterally with an understanding that America needed to be able to say, we don't have any idea what the hell you're doing. You didn't give us a heads up about Hania, which of course would be a good thing. Like, well, why would they want a heads up about Hania? Like, how would that help them? Because then now they can walk around and say, we didn't do this. We had no part of this. I don't know. I'm wondering what role we played in Israel's change in strategy.
I don't think, my sense is not any. I think
really?
that,
okay.
Yeah, I think from basically January through April, late January through April, the Israeli war cabinet, largely in deference to the U.S. government and pressure from the U.S. government, took its foot off the gas pedal and was trying to be very responsive to concerns expressed by the Biden administration. Was obviously basically didn't do anything in Rafah. I mean, imagine if what they'd done in Rafah they'd done 3 months earlier, which they basically could have.
Yeah.
They got nothing for all of that, meaning they did not advance militarily. They actually, I think, reversed. That was the weakest period of one of the weakest periods of the war since October 7th, and they got no real. They earned nothing from the administration. It's like the administration started to celebrate.
Maybe the opposite. Yeah.
Right. And the attacks against Israel from the region, the sort of what we call the Seven Front War against Israel, just became more brazen. So Israel was pulling back militarily, or at least was like in kind of wait and see mode. They did not deepen ties with the administration, other than the administration saying at one point, Blinken saying that Israel, and Biden saying that Israel has put forward this hostage deal plan. Israel's not the problem, Hamas is the problem. Okay, so they got something for that. And the attacks against Israel just increased. So I just sense sometime kind of April, May, Israel said we can't just be sitting ducks against these increasing attacks. I mean, the Houthis go from sending drones to Eilat, and then suddenly they send a drone to Tel Aviv. I mean, the heart of Israel's economy. Yeah. Can you imagine drone attacks in Tel Aviv? Yeah. It would shut down Israel's
It's like 10
economy.
feet from the American consulate, too.
Yeah.
Which is like a message.
Exactly.
50 feet.
Yeah. Every major tech multinational in the world has an operation in and around Tel Aviv. Imagine you're in Cupertino, California, at a headquarters, a corporate headquarters of a major multinational. It'd be like, let's get our people out of there. They're dropping drones,
and it's already happening because Delta Airlines is now not flying to Israel through the month of August. Has canceled flights in and out of Tel Aviv for the month of August without anything even starting to happen yet.
Right. So my point is, it just reached a point where the brazenness of the attacks were going up. The north is basically still a disaster zone because of the constant attacks from Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. They've shrunk the borders from northern Lebanon, from northern Israel to
20 miles further south.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's at some point Israel just said, look, we're not getting anything from the Biden administration for listening to them. They're giving us bad advice. right? Everything they predicted would happen has not happened, right? They said there'd be horrendous Israeli casualties in Gaza if they went into Gaza. Every casualty is obviously horrendous, but it's been a fraction of what the U.S. projected. They said they'd never be able to do Rafah, and if they did do Rafah, it would take them 3 or 4 months to move the Palestinians.
They kill thousands of people.
And they moved 1 million Palestinians out of Rafah within 10 days.
Yeah.
They said, as you said earlier, John, take the win, don't respond to Iran. Israel responded to Iran magnificently and sent an extremely important message for all the reasons you said earlier. Could you imagine if Israel had never responded to that? By the way, that operation from Iran where they launched 300 projectiles into Israel, we all just now understand, none of them got through. Isn't that great? This amazing multinational, multilateral defense, multi-layered defense. Imagine if 5%. Had gotten through. It would have been, it really would have been a regional war.
Yeah.
So I just think that the mindset in Israel is we just can't sit here taking this all.
Right.
We have to do something. And I don't think it's about U.S. politics.
Okay, well that's good to know. It's good to know because it is an American belief that literally everything that happens in the world revolves entirely around us, is our doing, is our fault, or we secretly made happen. And this is clearly a situation in which the administration is on its back foot because of this weird political moment that it finds itself in.
What's interesting also about it is that, seen in this light, if you look at Bibi's visit here and the speech he gave, Capitol, it almost seems like his setting the groundwork for saying we're going to take the gloves off in retrospect, because he made this extraordinary case, articulate case about the enemy is America's enemy and Israel's enemy. And, it was very bold.
It was, and it was also efficient in the sense that the administration had stopped communicating with the American people in any coherent way about what we were about in relation to this struggle, because it had absolutely no idea how to proceed politically. Dan, you got to run. I'm really grateful that you gave us the time that you've given us here, and we've gone through evering. And
John, I must say, I'm not sure I'll be back because I feel jostled by this new look for the commentary podcast, which is like cheery, hopeful optimism.
Oh, that's okay. I just think that anti-Semitism denied someone a vice presidential slot. Mm-hmm. So since I went there the first half, I think I had enough crushing morosity to last for the entire, just because I said one optimistic thing. One. I think the other thing is historically really terrible. So I am holding firm to the brand.
We'll see. I may file a class action suit against the swag, the commentary swag, crushing morosity. I'm not sure you guys can. I don't know if that
it's
slogan
around.
Is trademarked.
Oh, it's not trademarked, but who else would want it? Let's face it. Anyway, thanks so much, and I'm going to quickly offer a commentary recommends that is adjacent to our topic. I am halfway through Daniel Silva's, I believe, 23rd Gabriel Allon novel, just published, A Death in Cornwall. And it is as delightful. It's a weird thing to say about thrillers about Israeli art restorers who are also heads of the Shin Bet, and retired heads of the Shin Bet living in Venice with beautiful wives who then get sucked into plots involving looted art and various other things. But it is delightful because the great secret sauce of these novels is the dry dialogue and the incredibly attractive character of Gabriel Allon, the hero of these books. So that's A Death in Cornwall by Daniel Silva, just out like a couple weeks ago. And if you haven't read these books, you really can kind of pick them up at any time. You don't have to be on the Gabriel Allon timeline because he fills it in, but you're in for a treat. So again, thanks to Dan Senor, and for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.